Hello, hello, hello. I make it 1:30 my time, and I believe that's when I said I was gonna do the live. I maybe should have checked my calendar. Oh well. Hi, Kate. At least I know somebody's watching, right? Hi everyone. So, very exciting morning for me. It was supposed to be pouring with rain. It's not pouring with rain, but it was supposed to be. So I decided not to bike to my office, which is where I normally do my lives. So we are instead at home at my apartment. Hey, Katie, how are you? So yeah. And then, of course, since I'm home at the apartment, they decide to jackhammer and do a bunch of street work outside in the road. So if you guys hear jackhammering, that might be happening. Yeah, so what I've done is I've put my little fuzzy microphone that I use for podcasting onto my phone to record this live, and I'm not entirely sure it's going to work. Yeah. So I'm hoping it's working, and I'm hoping there isn't a bad lag. I tried testing it, and there seemed to be a lag. So we'll see, I guess. Road construction season, yes, indeed. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for chatting and signing in. As always, please tell me where you're watching from if you feel comfortable doing that. I love knowing it. The reason I do the live is because I get to spread it all over the world, and it's so much fun, like disease or plague. Thank you for your hat compliment. Is a little straw boater or spinner that I don't wear very often because it's really hard to pack. Well, I've tried packing straw. It's impossible without breaking it. But I do love it, and so I thought, well, I have an opportunity to be home. I will wear one of my silly hats. Right. So I've got my tea. I have my cover art, and hopefully this is all going to work. I'm seeing your comments. I think we're good. I think you're hearing me. And everybody's telling me where they are coming from. So ostensibly what we're talking about today is this, which is not, it's a very bright cover, so it doesn't come up great on the video feed, but you can, oh my goodness, Naomi is watching us from Hungary. Can you believe that? Wow. All over the world. Amazing. So yes, that's the fifth gender. That is the cover that everybody just got to see from in the chirp this morning, and then I've slowly been spreading it out over social media. I hope you guys are excited about it. My ridiculous little sci-fi. It's absurd and so much fun and sweet, and I think maybe a little bit thought-provoking. I hope it provokes some thoughts and discussions. Might even get some people upset. I don't know. You never know when you do something as weird as that. So I'll be taking questions about that or anything else a little bit later. I thought I'd spend a couple of minutes just chatting away while you all tune in. What did I have to tell you about? Oh, I was going to tell you my mom and the tea story. So over on the Parasol Protector group, we got into the discussion on weird things we'd either dunked our tea bags into accidentally or poured over our tea bags. And any tea drinker has probably done this at some point or another. Countless times I've put cold water on a tea bag, but I think that's a pretty normal behavior. I thought I boiled the kettle, and I, in fact, did not boil the kettle. So, but the story I wanted to tell you is about my mother. For those who haven't seen me talk about the inspiration for Solace, Alexia is partly inspired by my mother, and so this story ties to that series, to the Parasol Protector series. My mother is very British, so you have to cast your mind way back. Gail is a wee Gail, but still very firm in her personality, and which you all know well by now. And it is 1989 and the Loma Prieta earthquake. Loma Prieta hit the San Francisco Bay Area. The epicenter was down in Santa Cruz, which is about 2 hours south of where I grew up. But I lived on the fault line. I lived on the San Andreas fault line. And so it telegraphed all the way up to us pretty clearly. It was just after school. It was during tea time, aka rush hour. And but I was at home, and so were both of my parents. And we were having tea, or my mom and I were having tea. and the earthquake began. Now, in classic fashion, my dad, who is, a poet and feels things deeply, began to freak out and talk about the state of the world, and possible influences of higher powers. And then we all run out. Now, the first thing I did, of course, because I am the practical one in the family, was attempt to save all of the pottery because I don't want it to fall and crash. And then my parents were like, no, we're going to go outside now. So we all go outside. And the Loma Prieta is a spectacular earthquake. Literally, we're looking at the garden. My mom's a professional gardener, so and we're watching the earth roll like waves. It was an amazing thing to see. My dad, falls to his knees, kind of freaking out a bit. I'm like, what do I need to do? What can I fix? How can we stop this? What can we save? And I am, maybe 10 at the time. I'm a child. My mother, and this is the tea story, my mother spends the whole time holding her cup of tea, which has come out of the house with her because priorities, and she just is staring at the tea the whole time, making sure that it doesn't spill while a major earthquake is going on around her. So that is my first mother in the tea story. However, the other my mother in the tea story actually does involve dunking, which is my mother, ubiquitous tea drinker. That's who I get it from. She is sitting one evening, and she, for some reason, has never had side tables. Not big on side tables. So she's lying on the couch, and she has her mug of tea on the floor next to where she's lying. And she is on the phone with somebody, and then puts the phone down. And the phone stands upright. And my mother, of course, being my mother, does not realize it's an old handheld phone, a wire, not a cell phone, and doesn't really register that perhaps the phone should not be standing upright, because what in fact she did was she stuck the whole phone into her mug of tea. The phone then starts gurgling, and she realizes what she has done. So there's something major to accidentally stick in your tea, your entire phone. The hilarious end of that story is she then decided that the smart thing to do is to disassemble the phone and lie it out to dry in front of the fireplace, because what else would you do? And then she doesn't let it dry sufficiently before she puts it back together again and hangs it up. At which point, her partner, essentially my stepdad, Trevor, comes home. Trevor is quite Jamaican, and in his unflappable way, comes home late at night. Mom's in bed. He comes to her and he says, "Aunt, the phone, it is gurgling," because it just continued to bubble and gurgle quite happily in the cradle, as it turned out. So yeah, don't stick your phones in your tea. Moral of the story, I suppose. Yeah, so there we go. I promised I would tell you my mother and tea stories. Those are my two best mother and tea stories. Do not spill your tea in an earthquake, and do not stick your phone in your tea. Then you thought you wouldn't learn anything from this live. Right, speaking of, I'm drinking tea at the moment. So, how are we? I've got to keep an eye on the time. I don't have my normal setup. Usually I have like a clock right here to keep me on track. But I have to use my iPad instead. So I have all my books and stacks next to me if you guys want to ask me questions about anything. We are about 10 minutes in, and yeah, any questions, any thoughts, anything to get us started? This is just gonna be a normal Q&A. I think it'll probably be a little quieter than usual. Avery wants to know what tea I am drinking. I am drinking the tea I'm always drinking because I am lazy and boring. Which is, I'm drinking Twinings English Breakfast, their strong version, which is also called the 1706 strong. And then Avery also wants to know if there will be witches. I don't know. That's a really good question. I've never written witches. Mercedes Lackey once told a rather terrifying story about writing about witches and then encountering everyday witches, and their behavior towards her, and it has kind of scared me off. I know that's weird. Usually I'm not that scared of stuff like that, but I guess it happened when I was a very impressionable young age. So yeah, no particular intention, but I'm not entirely ruling them out. Sarah wants to know if the fifth gender is a standalone. It is entirely a standalone. So it has a beginning, middle, and end. It has characters that do not appear anywhere else. Depending on how well it sells and if people really love it, I actually have another mystery I would love to write with these characters. So another sort of space station police mystery investigation. So I'm not opposed to writing more, but I have no firm intentions at the moment. I just have to see how this one goes. Kevin wants to know if I have thoughts on Twining's blackcurrant breeze. I'm not a huge fan of blackcurrant flavoring. I know there are some people who really, really love it. It is not something, even though I was raised in a very British household, it is not something that my mother likes, I guess, because she never really, I have weird gaps in my British education because my mother is a Brit, but an expat and a super hippie. So I was raised with and Jewish, so raised with some very strange foodways, I suppose I should say. And she never liked blackcurrant, and I never had beans on toast either. Two like hallmarks of British cuisine never entered my life, so I never developed the taste for it. I also don't really like fruity black teas sometimes, but pretty rarely. Vicky says that they love my book covers. What goes into the designing, picking of the models and the costumes and stuff. Actually, the story behind this one is really, really interesting. Because it was a rough book cover to design, because it's my first foray into science fiction, and there are so many components to think about with a book cover. So the thing is that a book cover doesn't necessarily have to be a scene from what's inside the book. It needs to, it's more of a symbol of the spirit of the book than anything. It's like packaging on any product. So I like to say that the perfect or the pretty is the enemy of the correct in book covers, because it has to say the right thing to you, the reader. It has to warn people who are the wrong readers off picking up that book, and it has to telegraph to the right readers that they want to give this book a try. And that can be very, very challenging, especially if you're like me and you throw everything but the kitchen sink into a book, right? So the fifth gender was actually the third try, this particular book. And I'm sorry I don't have a physical copy. But so that cover was our third try. So I work with Starla Hutchin. She's a fantastic cover art designer. And I usually have a pretty good idea of what I wanted. So I knew purple had to be a very important element in the book. I tend to gravitate towards central imagery. I like symmetry. So some book covers, you'll see kind of the titles and stuff are sort of offset. I tend to have mine centered, and that's just a personal preference. Anyway, so when we started the conversation, I had this idea of like a yin-yang kind of thing with the alien and the love interest. But the problem is my alien is pronounced he and is essentially masculine in appearance. But he has very long, dreadlocky tentacle hair. So we were struggling how to do that and still to telegraph that that was essentially a gay romance, because didn't want people thinking it was a heterosexual romance. And it's hard to do that with a long-haired model. So that was a struggle to find any kind of model that worked initially. And then to find a model that had the right kind of like sort of noodly hair that I describe in the book. And sometimes I will change what I talk about in a book to better match cover art, but the hair was kind of non-negotiable. It's an important part of the plot in the book. So we struggled to find the right two models, and then we just struggled to find the right balance, and then to also incorporate sort of the science fiction element and the space station element, and like all of this other stuff was really challenging. And so the first cover we ended up with looked it was a good cover, but it looked really young adult because we ended up defaulting to sort of caricatured tentacles on manipulated photo imagery. And that's just a style that screams YA. And because I have a YA book that's set in the same greater universe, I didn't want there to be even a hint on this book that it was YA. It needs to read as sexy because there's some very explicit sex scenes in the book. So that cover was out. So then Starla did a cover that had just sort of swirls of tentacles on it. And it was really good, but it looked like nonfiction. It looked like kind of literary nonfiction or maybe women's fiction or something. So no imagery at all. Because my publishing house and all of my books have photo manipulated models on the cover, it's kind of basically the brand for my fiction. And because I intend to write nonfiction, I'd like to write a nonfiction book of the heroine's journey, we couldn't go with that cover because it was too amorphous in what signaling it was telling the audience about what was inside the book. So then we kind of went back to the drawing board, and I started looking through images of dancers, and that's when I came across him. That's when I came across this image, this guy. He's a ballet dancer, I think from the New York Ballet. And that is how, and I was like, okay, let's do something with this. And then what I want is like the sort of stars in the background and then something going on with tentacles for his hair. Sorry. So then I sent Starla a bunch of sort of sea anemone pictures, and she actually manipulated a sea anemone photograph, a stock art photo of a sea anemone to make that tentacle hair, because I really wanted the motion in his hair to be very clear. And then she made his body this lavender color, and then he's wearing shorts, so she had to kind of Photoshop and manipulate the shorts, so that's where there's sort of a nebula in his genital area, shall we say. Yeah, and then we experimented with writing the cover as fifth gender, with fifth written out, and then with the number, and I really liked the number better. And so actually, before I decided how to spell the title of the book, we worked on the cover, because how you spell the book in all of its metadata and everything when you're uploading it to pre-order is significant. So yes, so that is how we came up with the cover. That was a very long answer to your question. Part of it is education, like I've been doing this for 10 years, so that's how I think about, I think about cover art slightly differently from some authors, I think, because I know it's a marketing technique. And I can run through a couple of the other covers with you if you'd like. So this cover here, which is Competence, and this cover here, which is Poison or Protect, and this cover here, which is probably one of my favorites, which is Romancing the Werewolf. Those are all from Dark Garden. So Dark Garden Unique Corsetry are behind the looks, and then there are various different photographers who did work with models for Dark Garden. So I follow Dark Garden, and I used to work for them at the Dickens Fair, and I'm friends with the proprietor. And so we have this sort of relationship where I feel comfortable reaching out to her and saying, hey, can you hook me up with a photographer of that image? Because I'm really interested in using it on a book cover. But those are specific to like whether I can find something that really works for me. So I chose this one because she's fully covered. That was important because this is Primrose, so that was important for me. She looks a lot how I imagined Primrose. She's wearing a hat. Like, there were a lot of things that had to be in place for me to pick this, for me to see this and pick this. But and the reason I like to pick specifically working with a photographer and a product that I love, and I love the Dark Garden corset line, so that's part of it. But is that no one else will be using that image. So working with stock art, there's always the danger that a different author will also use the same model and the same exact image on their cover, whereas in this case, it's just less likely to happen. I don't have an exclusive agreement with the photographer. They're welcome to resell their photographs. That's not something I would do to a photographer. It's their art. But the chances are slimmer. It's a great deal more expensive. So also I can afford to do it where some independent authors can't. The same thing with this. So this was for a wedding photo shoot that Autumn and the Dark Garden models did. And I just reached out to the photographer and said, hey, would you be willing to resell that image to me? And then this is Autumn herself, the owner. And basically I was like, can I put that on the cover? But you can see that they're very different, the reasons behind it. So I chose this one specifically because they don't necessarily look exactly how I imagined Lyle and Biffy, but the sweetness of their contact with each other and the relationship between the two models is so clear and so charming that the emotional tenor to me spoke of Lyle and Biffy. And so I gave Lyle long hair and, you know, and just, I wrote that into the book. Because I just love the image so much. And then this one so you'll see with the Poison or Protect, the Delightfully Deadly books in general, that I'm hearkening to the originals in the YA series, in the Finishing School series, right? So I'm doing the solid background and the single person, which is easier to find than a couple, and sort of black and white to her to the body with the color in the background. And then I really look for the Delightfully Deadly books, I look for this direct gaze. I like a model who's looking directly out of the photograph at you, at the reader. It speaks to a little bit of aggression. And I feel like my spy characters kind of have that attitude. And so I want to make sure that the cover reflects that, as opposed to something like this, where I specifically am choosing models whose eye line is away. So this is Isaac on the cover of the Omega Objection. Now this is a stock art image, but he really looked like Isaac to me, and so I thought he was perfect for it, and he had the right shape to fit inside the wolf. Now, this is not stock art. This is a bought image, but he looks so much like Max that I couldn't help it on the cover of this image solution. Again, he had the right positioning to fit inside the sort of wolf silhouette. And again, his eye line is different. He's looking down, he's looking away. And that's because the San Andreas books, I feel like, are dealing with internal conflict a lot more and emotional stuff. And so it's less action driven. And so that's why I choose the models that are looking differently. So you can see I put a lot of thought into it. You know, there's a reason I like a lot of white space on these books. But as you can see, the first book has a white background, and the second book has a gray background, and the final book will have a dark gray background. So the books are also progressing, or the third book. I don't know if I'm going to be ending the San Andreas series. And then I also think about how they look on the shelf from the spine perspective as well. Whether I want the colors on the spines to line up nicely. I like the numbers to appear on the spines, which some authors and a lot of publishers intentionally don't do. So there's a lot. I put a lot of thought into cover art. Ask that one question and you get a ton of response. So this one came from Donna of Clockwork Couture. Donna is the model. This is Donna. Donna is on the cover of the Soulless series. She used to own a steampunk couture clothing supply company. She doesn't anymore, but she used to. And so she has a lot of pictures of models in steampunk garb. So if I need a fully clothed model, sometimes I'll go asking Donna, see if she has any good imagery. So that's how I got that one. This is another stock art image. But it's sort of distanced and slightly different, so that's why I went with that. And I really, with How to Marry, I really intentionally wanted to try almost completely new style of cover art. And that was just for the sake of experimentation. I mean, it certainly has it has this wallpaper thing with the wolves on it that comes from the Finishing School series, similar style font, of course. So I've tried to keep the same style font throughout my career. Orbit started me off with this kind of font, this sort of slashed sans serif font, and I've kind of kept the same style font for all of my covers until I switched to GL. So you'll notice the GL covers are serifed. That's intentional. Even the Fifth Gender, which is sci-fi. Usually you don't use a serif font in sci-fi, but I chose to because I wanted to make sure it went with the GL series of books. Yeah, so much thought. Okay, shall we move on from cover art? I can talk. I love cover art. I would love to be a cover art designer in another life. It's just so much fun for me to think about and deal with. Um, Rosalind wants to know what I love most about Percy. I think so. Percy, I identify really closely with Percy. Percy has a very scientific and analytical mind, and he adores Latin, and I am both. I feel both of those things very quite deeply. I think he reacts to things the most similarly to Alexia, strangely, in that he has kind of very practical, thoughtful responses to stuff, and he's not a very emotional character at all. But his internal dialogue is so absurd, and the way he can kind of get derailed and distracted by scientific inquiry is kind of really dear to me, and really, I really love that about a person. I love somebody who sees the world a little skewed, um, and who has kind of a very analytical approach to life. So, I was a scientist for years, so I feel very kin to Percy. Isa wants to know if the fifth gender is the same universe as Crudrat. And yes, it is, but it is a universe. So Crudrat takes place in a kind of crazy, repressed social society called the Wheel. And the Wheel doesn't appear at all in fifth gender. Essentially, it is the same technology for faster than light travel, and it is the same principle of colonization that I reveal in Crudrat. Um, but apart from that, there's nothing else that crosses over. So there's no crossover characters. There's not even crossover kind of species at all. So yes, it's the same universe, but not it's the same universe. I'm scrolling through your comments. Kevin says, "Where did I get the hat? I'm in love with it." It's vintage. Honestly, this one, I cannot remember where I got it. It is possible it's given to me or it came from my mother. My mother has a not bad, frankly, habit of randomly picking up vintage hats from me, often from her friends who are getting rid of it. Kevin, you said something else, but I'm afraid I can only read 3 lines at a time. Lena wants to know what emotively sexy tentacle hair means. Well, I love writing aliens. It's kind of one of my favorite things ever, frankly, because aliens are a vehicle for me to make commentary on human behavior. And I'm an archaeologist, anthropologist by training, right? So human behavior is very fascinating to me, and an alien looking in is great. But also, it's the opportunity for me as a writer to write things like emotion differently. So I'll give you an example with werewolves first, which is, you may not notice this, but in all of my books, if you're getting a werewolf perspective, you get the smell of things first. They will describe what things look like, but werewolves always scent things first. So it's just a conceit that I use as a writer, and like I said, readers may not even be aware of it, but I use it to kind of characterize the universe. So when you're working with an alien, I get to have an alien react with different senses, and also with different like mental acumen. And so Tristal, who's the main character, comes from this alien race with 5 different genders, and so the gender, sex characteristic, and relationship status of people is very important to him. So when you're in his thoughts, you get those categorizations for anyone he encounters, any person he encounters, as part of their identity. And that, of course, is me alluding to the fact that in the linguistics of his culture, you would conjugate for all of those things. So he comes from a culture with an extremely complicated language, because every verb, rather than having a pronoun at all, would instead be conjugated for who you are talking to, about, or with. And so you need to know all of these aspects of the person you're talking to, about, or with. And that's just me poking fun at like the idea of gender, how a culture with 5 genders would have a linguistic. It's not like endemic to the story, and may not even be obvious, because I'm not going to muddy up the fun of plot and characterization with excess detail. It's unnecessary, but it is part of his thought process when you're hearing his thoughts. Similarly, his hair is how he expresses emotion. So he does have, like facial reactions to stuff, but in actuality, his first reaction is in his hair. So he's a very enthusiastic, kind of chipper, loving, excited alien. And his hair shows that. So sometimes his hair gets really puffed up, and sometimes it flattens down, and sometimes it gets spiky. And as a writer, I will write about these things sort of gently at first, but both you and Dre, who's his love interest, as the story progresses, hopefully start to react to his hair as I describe it first, realizing that the hair is telegraphing his emotion. So that's what I mean about emotively sexy tentacle hair. The hair is also like part of, because it's part of emotion, it's sort of part of relationship and love and the sex act, because in this book there is explicit sex, but it's very romantic, it's very emotionally driven. So Dre's relationship to Tristal's hair in particular is very kind of intimate, and understanding, and eventually quite loving, because Dre comes to realize that this is an important part of like body language and communication. So that's what I mean by emotively sexy tentacled hair. Sarah wants to know if the audiobook of Fifth Gender will be coming on alongside the book. So I don't know. I'm working with a new narrator for this, and that's not because I don't adore Kurt. It's because Kurt is really booked right now, and he was having some serious voice problems. That's why the Omega Objection audiobook is delayed. Don't worry, everything seems to be going smoothly now. It turned out he had strep throat. But because of that, I kind of panicked since I didn't know what was going on with Kurt, and we've contracted with a different narrator who I think you guys will love, but I'm not going to tell you anything more until we get the assets and everything. The recording tracks. So he said he would be able to start recording in April, but who knows how long it takes to record. So, and the book comes out in May. So I think having it drop at exactly the same time is unlikely, but hopefully not. Hopefully there won't be anything like the delay I've been having with the Omega Objection. We'll see. Like I said, it's my first time working with this narrator, so. But good to have another. If he does work out, it's good to have another narrator, kind of who I know I'm comfortable working with. Avery, I can only see the first 3 lines of your question about your wonderful gender fluid friend. So if you could just write the question as a shorter sentence. Just a reminder to everybody, when I'm reading through the questions on the live feed, I can only read like the first 3 lines. It's really conjoined, because if I press to read more, it takes me away from the live feed. It's a bug within the Facebook system. So surprise, surprise. Kevin has a response to Avery about a similar question. So between the two of you, if you could re-ask that question, that'd be awesome. Sarah says the cover is beautiful. I am like incredibly charmed with the cover. I think after all that back and forthing with Starla, we ended up with something that was very striking. I mean, there are back to the cover. We keep going back to the cover. There are other things about this cover that make it striking, like it looks good very small, which, you know, in this day of digital shopping and digital readers and social media and seeing things online, you really need a book cover that isn't messy when it's tiny. That's one of the reasons, even though I have good pull quotes from like other review sites like Publishers Weekly, and I have, you know, great bloggers who give me awesome reviews and stuff. I don't often put pull quotes on my cover, and that's partly because it kind of clutters it up and makes it messy to have even more words in different places. So, and I want it to look like clean and pretty when it's small. And hot. Yes, the Fifth Gender cover, there's a reason it's this like essentially naked dude on it, and that's to telegraph that there's explicit sex in it. Carolyn says that Romancing the Werewolf is a favorite of mine. I love that one too. There's just, I don't know, there's something about the like, it's so sweet, this cover. Like maybe it's a little too sweet for some people, but I don't know. I just think it's so sweet, those two boys. Avery says I should check out John Kerry. I think this is a John Kerry image, actually. I think that's his. So yes, I know John Kerry well. Kevin says the Dark Garden is saved on my phone for future drag shows. Oh, they're so good. They do really amazing work. Sarah says thanks for walking through the process of the cover art. Yeah, I mean, perhaps it's a little bit of an overshare, but I just think it's so fun to think about. But yeah, it is something that readers, I think, don't think about because you don't need to. You just need to respond to what speaks to you or not. But yeah, it is really important, and I think it's so important that the cover not only attract the right readers, but like turn off the wrong readers. Like I had a friend of mine who really responded negatively to the fifth gender cover, and I was like, actually, you're not my target demographic, so that's probably a good thing if there is a target demographic for cozy mystery, queer, space, porn. Justina says she's happy that I'm nerdy about it. It's so interesting to me. Visual imagery is something that I'm very, I don't know, delighted by. I'm always analyzing my own reactions to cover art. Sometimes I'm just profoundly turned off by a cover, and I always wonder why. Sally says that she just got off work and she's listening to me in the car. Well, don't look at me while you're in the car. Just listen, okay? Karen says go back. Yeah, it is fun. I would recommend that, your readers, I'm assuming you're watching my live because you're readers, but it is fun to kind of go back with a different eye and just look at the covers of some of the books you love and be like, why do I respond to that, or why don't I respond to that, or what does that cover say, or even what is the publishing house or the author trying to say with that cover. This is very fascinating. At least it is to me. Avery tried to repeat the question and it didn't work again, so just the bottom half of the question, please. Asa wants to know if there will be a second book in Crudrat. So, I get this question once in a while. Crudrat, for those of you who don't know, only exists as a full cast audio. It does exist in printed form, as it was at the time. It needs a heavy rewrite, and there is a second book. It's always was planned as a duology, but I just haven't had the bandwidth or the time. Part of the problem with Crudrat, such as it is, it has an extremely strong voice, with a very specific cadence, and it breaks into my other books. So if I work on that book, it kind of leaks in. So I have to have isolated time to work on it, and I just haven't. There's also some weird stuff kind of going on with the YA market right now, so I'm just not sure it's the right time to work on that or bring it out. So it's there, it's sitting there, it's percolating. I need kind of a clear schedule, and then I'll refocus on it. But I do intend to finish it someday. It's one of the reasons, for those of you who want Crudrat as a book, it's one of the reasons I haven't brought it out, is because the second one isn't ready yet. And it isn't really a cliffhanger, but it is kind of. And the last thing I want is even more people wanting the second book and writing me emails and asking about it, because so that's why it's still on the back burner. Naomi says that Tristal's hair is like the tail of a cat. Yeah, it kind of is. Stein wants to know if Tristal's people, who are the Galloy, can plug their hair into something like an avatar. Nope. No, but, well, it is an important plot point, though, the hair. Britta wants to know how I decide how explicit a novel will be, like Poison or Protect versus The Finishing School. Well, that's a very good question. Right. So, I can start with fifth gender, and then we'll come back to Poison or Protect. I actually, because Crud is YA, and because it is ostensibly the same universe, although very little is shared, I did think about trying to make fifth gender less explicit. But I realized as I was writing it, and I was reading it out loud to my my writing group, and sending it off to my beta readers and stuff, that the thing about writing an alien species with 5 different genders is human curiosity really, 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 really wants to follow them into the bedroom. And so did I. And Dre, who is the human love interest, and Tristal have such a dynamic kind of crackling romantic relationship with each other that the writer instinct was urging me to just write it. So I wrote it explicit, and then I went back and looked at it really closely to see if I could scalpel those sections out. But they're so important to the story that it just wasn't going to work. So I just decided that it was going to be a GL novel. So that's part of the reason I have this second pen name, is just to telegraph to the readers, to you guys, that it's going to be explicit in its sex. I do not like to write graphic violence, the squicky stuff. I don't like to write anything that's gross or disgusting. That's not but I do like to write explicit sex. I've learned to enjoy it. I used to be scared of writing the nookie scenes, but I've learned to like it. And part of that, I guess, for me is that as an author, it's important. I feel like it's important to not shame the sexual act in any way. And it is important to shame a glorification of violence. So long as I feel like the sex that I am talking about is, what's the word I am looking for? Is beautiful. So long as I feel like it's talking about an emotional connection between 2 characters or more, then it's significant enough for me to want to put that example out into the universe, I guess, is what I'm saying. And that's one of the reasons I write semi-explicit with my queer characters as well, or very explicit, depending on the feel of the story to me. And that's because I want people to enjoy sex, if that's something that you want to do, and not shame it, and not be embarrassed about it, and not think of it as something dirty, and all different aspects of sex. So that's why I write explicit sex, I guess. And this is not a question I've had before, so I've not really thought about it. I would be more articulate. So the story usually tells me how explicit it wants to be, and there's no other way of putting it but that. I'm sorry. But that's why I have the 2 pen names. Now, on to Poison or Protect. This was an interesting one for me because it isn't actually as explicit as you think it is. So there's not a lot of parts named. There's not a lot of super description of the axe itself. But it is explicit. I would say it's explicit. But I also feel like the sex that is being engaged in is one that we don't get in romance at all, very little, which is the woman being in charge. And I'm not, how do I put this? It's not for a young adult audience at all, but it's not, I don't think it's bad for female readers in particular to get this kind of example in their life, which is a female dominant in the bedroom who knows what she wants, who learns what she wants, who knows how to ask for it, and a male who's willing to give that to her. And so that's why I don't worry about this book. But all parents should make the decisions for their own kids in all ways. And like I said, this is not a young adult book. But I'm not ashamed of it being a spin-off from a young adult series, because I feel like it sets a very good example for women who are becoming sexually active. So there. Stick that in your tea and drink it. Oh, Avery wants to know what astrological sign I thought Madame LeFou was. switching of gears. I don't know. Man, I wouldn't be surprised if she's a Scorpio. So scientists don't really believe in that stuff. Raised by a hippie, raised with that stuff. So yeah, but she's such an engineer. I don't know. She's super cerebral. Probably maybe an air sign of some kind. Could be an Aries, something like that. But you know she's really, really good in bed. So so my temptation would be to say Scorpio, and probably difficult to get along with in the long haul. Moving on. And Nessa says, oh, while you're scrolling. Yeah, I always make a hum while I'm scrolling through comments. You guys always know what I'm scrolling while my hand is up, but also. Hannah popped in to say she was excited about fifth gender. Yay! Avery says, Autumn made your corset. That's wonderful. Zemma says, yay, a live that's not after your bedtime. Yeah, this is an arbitrary live. Just decided at the last minute. The next one will be at the usual time on a Saturday, but I wasn't managing to fit one else in this month, so I thought I'd just do Random Tuesday. I'm scrolling. Sorry. Moment of silence. Where are we for time? It's probably a good... Oh, yeah. It's probably a good idea to stop asking questions at this moment. As usual, I will go back through and reply to your question if I didn't get it in the live. And you should feel free. Also, you can post it in the event or just ask any questions on my page. And I always try and get back to everybody. Or always, you could always ask them in the group as well. This Madame Leflou's astral sign. We got that question answered. Justina's being hilarious. Aww. Kevin says Solace, so the Parasol Protector got a friend through a really tough time and just wanted to say thanks. And so welcome, absolutely. I always say that what I write essentially at its heart is just comfort food books. Like, they're just books that I hope make you feel better. Sometimes they make people think a little bit, but I think most of the time they just help you get through the day. And that's what I want to write. I want to write things that make me happy. Here there be porn. Yes, that's what the GL moniker says. Elizabeth just finished rereading the Finnish Queen School series and maybe has a question about it, but again, I can only read the top part. Naomi wants to know what's the POV of the fifth gender. It's two closed person POVs swapped back and forth. So it's mostly Tristal, the alien, but occasionally you get the detective's POV, Dre, as well. So it's most like the San Andreas books. That's the reason it's under that pen name as well. It will also have the sort of glassy cover and length and everything that's more similar to the San Andreas books. Justina wants to know if the Delightfully Deadlies should be GL fair too. I don't think so, because some of the Parasol Protectorate books get pretty, not necessarily explicit, but they get pretty sexy. And I'm not sure if any of the other Delightfully Deadly books will be explicit. Also, the GL books are all queer, and the Delightfully Deadly books mostly are not. So that has to be telegraphed as well, and I'm just not going to do another pen name. That seems ridiculous. So that is why they stay Gail, the Delightfully Deadly books. Yeah. The next one has very low... It's sexy, but it is not at all explicit. So, yeah. I think it's okay. I'm not too worried. So far, no one has been really angry about Poison or Protect. Or if they have, they haven't told me about it. So, I live in ignorance. La la la. Yeah. Susan says, Universal Monsters by Gaslight. Oh, so funny. Lily says, the first thing I do is sit in my favorite computer and hear explicit sex. Yeah, we're talking about sexual content in books. I'm trying to come up with a philosophy on life. So much chatter going on in the comment stream. Elizabeth wants the smoochy on the smoochy scale. Where is fifth gender? For those of you who missed that in my feed, one smoochy, but it's descriptive. This is smoochy. This is at the bottom of the smoochy scale. Not the very bottom, but pretty low down. C words are mentioned. But of course only one of the C words because it's mostly masculine parts, shall we say. So again, just like if you've read the San Andreas books, the fifth gender is the same heat level as those books. So smoochy scale. We love the smoochy scale. Oh, thank you, Sarah. Sarah said very nice things about my romance being tender. I like that. Tender is a good word. John Kerry has theories, which we're going to ignore because that's not our responsibilities. Sama says something about 15-year-old lesbian daughter loving whatever it is. Loving poison or protect. Yeah, I have lots of feelings about children and protecting children and children's knowledge of sex. But I am not a parent, so it's really not my place to say. But I will say, as Americans, by and large, we damage our girl children by not properly educating them about the pleasure of sex and their right for refusal, but also their right for request and experimentation with themselves and their own bodies. And I think it is a real problem and needs to be addressed somehow. And the only way I have to address those sorts of things is through my writing. Steen says, whose parents pay attention to what they read? Yeah. Not a surprise to anybody, I suspect, that this was an early bloomer and read Bodice Rippers at about age 10. So, it's the way things go. Ty's popped on to say I live that. Thank you, Ty. Oh, that's sweet. Katie says my books are books to cuddle up with after a rough day. Yes, I love that idea. That makes me very happy. I think if that is how you define my books, the fifth gender is probably the most cuddly. It is definitely a warm feels book. It made me so happy to write, and it made everybody laugh when I was reading it out loud to the writers. So, yay. Right, how are we doing for time? We're getting there. I'm scrolling as fast as I can. Hoping there's not too many important questions left. Oh, that is the sweetest thing to say. Now you're gonna make me cry. That the Zema says that was actually a huge part of her daughter having the guts to come out was like reading my books. That is not uncommon, and it makes me feel so good every time. Yay, so many people. Justina, you're hilarious. You're knocking it out of the park. Justina says, is the GL stand for gay L then? With all the books being queer. Very cute, very cute. Or the GL can stand for gay lit. Oh my god. All right. Back to the questions. Avery wants to know if I will be at San Diego Comic-Con this year. I will not. I was there 2 years ago. I love San Diego Comic-Con, but it is a lot for me to take. I'm not like as an extreme an introvert as a lot of writers, but I don't do well in really big crowds. Like who does actually? But it's just a lot. And so I seem to make it back once every like 4 or 5 years, and that is pretty much what I can do. I will be at Denver's Comic-Con, which is no longer called Comic-Con. It is now called Denver Pop Culture Con, but I will be there, which is a little smaller. Stein wants to know if Alexia and Genevieve have a little snuggle on the trip together. Well, you're welcome to imagine that. Elizabeth says we should rate my books on the Taco Bell hot sauce scale. That doesn't work for me because Taco Bell hot sauce is never spicy enough. I mean that in all ways. I like really spicy food, everybody. I'm a heat seeker. Oh, Berta says that my dominant women in prose, as I write them, are the best ever read. Thank you very, very much. It's a underrepresented trope in all fiction, frankly. Lily says that I am educational to listen to. Ziba is talking about being Danish. In case you care, the Danes in the audience, I am by inheritance Danish, I suppose you could say. My dad's side of the family is all Danish. So, yeah, there it is. Anne wants to know if I have an explanation as to why there are so few comedies in steampunk and science fiction. What a good question. There's generally very little comedy in commercial genre fiction. So romance, science fiction, fantasy, and steampunk and all of the genre, all of it is very little comedic stuff. There are many reasons for this. I, in fact, just did a lecture on comedy and genre. One of the ones is that it's not taken seriously, so comedy never wins awards. It is not bought by publishers, despite the fact that if it's done well, people will buy. It sells, but it doesn't get any respect. Comedy, because it's funny, right? So it's easy to dismiss. So that's why there isn't a lot. It is the hardest thing to write, I think, and so people don't write it. Oh boy, you guys, it's so easy to make someone cry. It's so easy to gross someone out. It's so easy to make somebody excited and to write an action scene. As far as I'm concerned, it's easy to do. It's really, really, really hard to make someone laugh. So I think that's why it's underrepresented. Steampunk is interesting to me because the movement itself, in terms of like events and stuff, is very comedic and whimsical and fun and lighthearted. But steampunk comes also, as writers, it comes out of cyberpunk. Cyberpunk is very dark and gritty. The punk part of steampunk is this alternate cultural movement. And that can be very kind of subversive and dark, rebellious, and angry in a lot of ways. And so I think steampunk that has been influenced by cyberpunk and comes out of the literary movement in particular can get very dark and very depressing, and very gruesome and very violent. And so there's a disparate between many of the writers of second wave steampunk, and that's what I am. I'm a second wave writer. And there are those of us like me who essentially came at steampunk via the movement, the clothing and the music and all that sort of stuff. And we write with a whimsical bent because that's what we come from. And then there are writers who come out of the literary side who come from cyberpunk, and they tend to write with a much darker bent. And I think that's why steampunk in particular can get quite dark. There's a conversation of fanfic going on in the comments, which I'm going to scroll through. Becky kind of showed up finally. She's late. We're rounding in on concluding here. Kevin says Kevin has recipes for me. Ooh, spicy recipes. Is that what are we on the spicy thing? Yeah. The aforementioned essentially stepfather it makes a Jamaican jerk chicken that is to die for, and also burns most of your lips off, but you cannot stop eating it, and I love it so much. I love spicy food. Yeah. And there are different kinds of spice for me. I mean, this is a whole other conversation, and I'm winding us up. But I have deep feelings on the different kinds of spices, like front of the mouth. I'm a super taster, so like the front of the mouth spice and the bright spices of a lot of Asian cuisine versus the like depth spices and the kind of back of the mouth heat an earthiness of, say, a lot of Indian curries. Like there's such a range of like spice profiles and different heats, not just heat levels, but different kinds of heats that you get from different heat delivery systems. You know, pepper, like what, or like the nasal super spice of, say, wasabi or the radishes. I find these sort of things fascinating. Very interesting to me. I don't, however, I don't have anything to prove. Like, I don't necessarily need to burn myself just to show that I can eat something really spicy. Like, the rest of the dish has to be good. Like, there has to be purpose to the spice. Like, I will chow down on some, like, no heat at all Ethiopian food quite happily. Or even something like Peruvian cuisine. But I do like some heat when it's warranted by the dish. Justina wants to know what's with my coffee hate. I actually do drink coffee. Oh, I know. Mostly because I have this theory that bad coffee is better than bad tea if you're desperate for caffeine. But I have an image to maintain, and that is as a tea drinker. But yeah, I've been known to drink coffee in my day, but I'm a latte person. It's the bitterness, I think. Beans are endemically likely to be more bitter than tea. Most tea, anyway. And so that's why I'm more of a tea drinker, I think. I was raised to be a tea drinker. I like it better. I think you have to be raised with it, though. People come to coffee. It's very rare for someone to come to tea sort of late in life. But yes, I've been known to drink coffee. Part of that was because I excavated in Italy, and that is where the good coffee is. And so that is where I learned to like it. I didn't like coffee until then, and so that is also part of the reason I'm an espresso drinker. So I like a blonde bean. I do not like a dark roast. I do not like a pour over. I do not want my barista to scald my beans. I don't understand anybody who drinks that kind of coffee. So I have very strong and extremely snobbish opinions on coffee as well as tea. Caffeine is a very serious business. Avery says that Terry Pratchett does very good with comedic fantasy, so it can be done. Yes. And if you were a fan of me and a fan of Terry Pratchett, you should be reading T.J. Klune's Lightning Struck Heart. Everybody should read that book. It is the funniest fantasy book I've read since Terry Pratchett. I stayed up way later than I should, just laughing so hard. My stomach ached the next morning like I'd gone through a workout. T.J. Klune's Lightning Struck Heart. Ignore the cover. Please ignore the cover. Harken back to our discussion on what cover art should do. Look at the Lightning Struck Heart and realize what it does wrong. But still read the book. Angelica says Cyberpunk definitely takes itself too seriously. I know. I don't know how hackers got snuck through. Humor and romance is one of life's greatest pleasures, says Lee, and I could not agree more. Yes, Elizabeth says that getting charming and whimsical with humor is good, but also having a plot is hard, and I agree. If Terry Pratchett falls down anywhere, it's in his plots. I mean, tell me the plot of The Color of Magic. Tell me the plot of Sorcery. Like, there kind of just really isn't one. But that's because the plot, or the plot of The Ear Affair by Jasper Fforde. Like, it's hard, because, I mean, often a comedic fantasy will default to a quest plot, which is fine. But yes, that is true. The balance is hard in comedy. It doesn't have to be, though. You can do it. I am an outliner, so like I believe in outlining your plot, and therefore you don't have to worry about it, and then you just write the rest of it funny. Anne wants to know if I would write climate fiction. Like Paolo Bacigalupi does, The Water Knife, for example. I don't think so. I tend to veer away from depressing topics, because I write comedy, right? I think that's just too much of a challenge for me. It's hard for me to make light of things that really do upset me and really do depress me. I'm eternally grateful that I'm not, for example, like a stand-up a political comic at this juncture in time or something, because there's a reason that I write set in either a super fantasy present day that's a lot nicer than the current one, or in the future or in the past. And that's because I struggle mentally to grapple with the present. So I would rather not write about it. And we can't end on that kind of depressing note, so let me see if I can find another question. Yes, if there are writers watching right now, I urge you to try writing something funny. We need more of it, quite apart from it. Like, we desperately need funny fiction. The more funny fiction, the better. And it's also good. It's good for you as a writer to challenge yourself to try to write something funny because it's hard. And yeah, pick up the gauntlet. I am throwing it down. It is floppy and tentacled, and you should pick it up and try and write something funny. I urge you. It is good to challenge yourself. Ashley says we need a live stream about spices. I should do a live stream one day that is all about food. Just like, yes, this author is just going to talk about food for an hour. We're not going to mention books at all. Justina says sauerkraut. Like, yes, I am with you. I like spicy and pickled, which is why I think kimchi is one of the greatest gifts to mankind. Buffalo sauce. Buffalo sauce is good. Oh, we're talking about spicy things, are we? Any last questions for me to end on? Let me sing. Secret coffee drinker. Yes, you guys know all of my secrets. Angelica. Yeah, the only downside of the lightning struck heart, which is just wonderful and so funny, is that it is a bit long. But TJ Klune kind of goes long often, so you sign up for that sometimes. Coffee discussion continues. Yes, the coffee drinkers are as rabid as the tea drinkers, just not as vocal on my particular feed. Naomi says that she actually read a book because the cover offended her so much. And excuse me, Naomi, if you don't have she, her pronouns, but that is that is very funny. I have done that too. I have occasionally looked at the cover and been like, I am really mad at this cover. I'm mad at this. Often happens actually with traditional publishing. So when I know a book is traditionally published and I feel like the publisher really like stymied the author with a terrible cover, I will sometimes read the book just to like be on the author's side, just to be like, I'm fighting for you, little author. I'm gonna read it despite what your publisher did to you. Yes, Pratchett was very good with language, but man, if you want a funny author who's good with language, Douglas Adams. I mean, I know everybody always mentions Douglas Adams, but like I said, I was teaching this comedy course recently, and I kept bringing up Douglas Adams because he's the master of a one-liner. He's just so good at like description and just this little twist on expectation in one sentence. He's just a real genius with that. Not necessarily wordplay. If you want an author who can do wordplay, word manipulation, and comedic word choices, that's P.G. Wodehouse. But man, Adams can do a sentence. Like, they hung in the air exactly the way bricks don't. Like, who comes up with that? It's so good. Anyway. Right? Humor being necessary and healthy. Maybe Douglas Adams and my love of Douglas Adams is a good way to end this. So I'm sorry if I didn't get to your question. And next time, I promise I will, or I'll go back and double check the comments and hope that I got everybody. But thank you all so, so much for tuning in and listening to me tell silly stories about my mother and rant about explicit sex and about comedy in genre fiction. And you have been challenged, if you are a writer, to write something funny. Yeah. Do it. Do the thing. Look, I just wrote a freaking sci-fi about a tentacled alien and a mystery and explicit sex and space stations. Like, do it. It's not that hard. You can do it. Okay. I love you guys. And, guys, I love all of you. I'm trying to be better about my pronouns. I love you, my darlings, my gentle folks out there. And I will talk to you soon. The next live is going to be at the usual time on Saturday in a couple of weeks. I'll talk to you then.